Yo, what's going on, guys? Welcome back to my channel and welcome to today's video. So what we're going to be chatting about today then, this subject kind of stems on from a lot of questions that I've been getting recently, and this is something that I've generally thought of based on a lot of the things that I see across social media and a lot of the questions I get my way. So when it comes to the subject of growing muscle, it's my personal belief that the general public seem to overcomplicate this so much, and I can talk about this from experience. I remember when I first started my own journey, I often overcomplicate the process. I tried to focus on too many things, I was reading too much into certain things, and my mind was going off in different directions, trying to focus on shit that really didn't matter. All at the same time I was doing this, I wasn't actually focusing on the basics of what muscle building basically relies upon. And this is the whole point of this video then. I want to kind of once and for all kind of talk about the whole journey of muscle growth, and I want to go through the 6 things that I really think that people need to actually nail down and focus on the most if they want to continuously build muscle throughout their fitness journeys. So without further ado, we're going to go straight into the first point. So guys, the first point that I really want to make then when it comes to the whole process of building muscle is you really need to keep it simple. And as daft as that sounds, I honestly do believe, and I do find from the stuff that I come across, people really don't keep it simple. They like to make it really complex. And this can go in a few different directions, but mainly it comes down to programming. What I find is a lot of guys are, researching too much into periodized programming, and they're going off in different directions in terms of variations of exercises. Whether they should be including things like blood flow restriction training, whether they should be using chains and bands for their compound lifts. All of these very much little details that everyone seems to be focusing on, and people really don't understand that simplicity really does rule when it comes to progress in your fitness journeys. And so this is what I really want to say on the matter. If you are a beginner on your fitness journey and you are wanting to gain muscle, if you're very much at a beginner level, you can get away with a very basic program. And it doesn't need to be periodized in any such way. You don't need to be like undulating rep schemes. You don't need to be doing different reps every single week and all that stuff, okay? For beginners, you can literally get away with just having a very simple training program, whether it's an upper lower split, whether it's push pull legs, whatever it may be. As long as it's got the right amount of volume, and you just focus on progressing the amount of load that you're lifting on a week-to-week basis, you are going to build muscle. You don't need to be worrying about the types of training that you're doing and stuff like that. You just need to make sure that you're getting enough volume in per muscle group, and you just need to make sure that you're lifting with enough intensity to force a stimulation for growth. For beginners, it really is as simple as just increasing load on a week-to-week basis. You don't need to worry about like deloads and progressions and stuff like that just for now, or changing rep schemes. For now, you can literally get away with just making simple alterations to load, and that's going to help you to gain so much muscle at the very start of your journey. So really, you just need to keep it simple, and there's no need to make it any harder than that. But even for intermediates and more advanced people as well, again, there's still too much, I think, when it comes to progressions and stuff like that. You still need to keep it fairly simple even when you are an intermediate or an advanced level. Yes, of course, every single training block, there should be like a deload at the end of it and stuff like that. And yes, when it comes to the next training block, you need to make small adjustments, but they really do need to be small. It doesn't need to be anything drastic. You don't need to change the entire block. You might just swap out 1 or 2 assistance movements that have the same effect, but it's just a different exercise and it causes a different stimulus. It can be as simple as that. So just to kind of sum up this point, guys, you really need to keep it simple when it comes to the programming aspect of your training. Look for constant progressions, but don't make too many drastic alterations. You can get away with just doing the basics, focusing on getting the right amount of volume in, increasing volume wherever possible, and just increasing load. And occasionally just swapping around certain exercises and bringing new variations into your training blocks. Just keep it simple. So guys, the second point I'm going to make then is all about compound lifts. Now, for those who may not have seen some of my previous content before, just to basically sum it up, compound lifts are the kings of muscle growth. Exercises like bench press, OHP, deadlift, squats, and other hip hinge movements, they all recruit many different muscle groups. The more muscle groups that are recruited by the body, the more load you can effectively handle across the body, and the more that your body is then going to have to adapt to the right amount of stress that you are placing upon it. which is what actually enforces and accelerates muscle growth. They are the daddies. They are pretty much the kings of muscle growth. They are recruiting so many muscle groups, it is forcing your body to grow and adapt to the extreme amount of stress you are placing upon it. Now, when it comes to compound lifts in your program, something I want to kind of talk about here is, first of all, when it comes to the compound lifts, you want to be practicing them quite a lot, especially if you are a brand new person to the gym. If you are right at the start of your fitness journeys, you could probably get away with doing these compound lifts maybe 2, 3, even potentially 4 times a week. Now, you might not necessarily have to do a lot of volume with them, or you might not be necessarily handling a lot of load with each time that you frequently actually use these lifts. But the whole point, in my opinion, of doing these compound lifts frequently is that you are teaching your body how to actually perfect these movements constantly. The more practice you put in to doing these compound lifts, the better you're going to get at executing the exercise. I mean, this is something I'm going to talk about a little bit later on, but you're going to get better at executing the movement. You're going to get better and more efficient at recruiting the right muscle groups at the right time throughout the lift. The more that you kind of practice these compound lifts as well, it's also going to improve your motor unit recruitment, and it's also going to improve the way that your nervous system adapts to these exercises. So with all of that in mind, the more practice that you put in with these compound lifts, the more you're actually going to perfect the movement. And with more perfection with that movement, that's swiftly going to lead on to more progress with that lift. Again, this is something I'm going to go on in the next clip. But the more that you're able to basically perform these compound lifts with the correct form, the correct technique, and with the right execution, and the more that you can do it frequently, you are going to gain so much benefit out of these lifts, and you are going to build a serious amount of muscle if you can learn how to do these things properly right from the get-go. So in my opinion, compound lifts are so important when it comes to the muscle building process. The earlier that you can learn these lifts, the more efficient you get with these lifts, the more progress you're going to make further down the line. And that leads me swiftly into the next point. The next point I want to make, guys, is execution. More specifically, exercise execution. This is something I kind of touched upon in the last clip. One thing I see 95% of, the people that I see in the gym and online through social media and stuff is so many people struggle to actually execute an exercise properly. And what you've got to understand here, of course, is, I think a lot of people have this mentality that they're just literally shifting a weight from A to B. They're not actually completely focused on the process of how they move the weight from the start point to the end point. And that is where they're missing out so much. Obviously, as you guys may have seen in some of my previous content, in my previous videos, creating tension on the muscle group is paramount, because obviously the more tension you create on the muscle, the more muscle fibers are going to be recruited and of course are going to be broken. The more stress that you place on the muscle, the more it's going to cause an adaptation or force an adaptation down the line to help stimulate growth. And this all comes about from the amount of muscle fibers that you can recruit through tension. And so many people actually end up losing tension because they're not performing exercises properly. I see it all the time with people doing squats, with bent over rows, with bench pressing, with incline dumbbell presses, all over the shop. So one thing you really need to focus on is you need to actually perfect and master each exercise. And I know that sounds pretty anal and it sounds incredibly long-winded, but trust me, you are going to get so much more benefit out of every exercise if you can feel the tension and you can feel the movement all the way throughout, just by learning how to actually understand the movement properly. So my advice for you would be to, whatever exercises in your training program, make sure you fully understand it. Go onto YouTube, read articles about it, understand how that muscle is meant to move, understand how that movement works, and focus, especially when you're in the gym, on making sure you can feel the tension throughout. Maybe you have to slow down the reps, maybe you might have to drop the weight slightly so you can actually feel more tension in the muscle and you can actually feel the exercise better, whatever it may be. Exercise execution is the #1 priority of every single session that you do in the gym. If you cannot execute an exercise properly, do not expect to recruit as many muscle fibers as you potentially could, and do not expect to create such a stimulus that it forces an adaptation to grow. It is as simple as that, guys. But with that one out of the way, we go on to the next point. The next point then, guys, is progressive overload. Now, this is a term that gets thrown around the gym so much without many people actually knowing what the goddamn hell it means. In a simple sense, all progressive overload is you are effectively overloading the muscle with some form of stimulus or some form of stress that it is not currently used to, which is then going to force an adaptation. Now, in very, very simple terms, I'm just going to kind of say this outright with progressive overload. Many people believe that progressive overload is a simple case of just lifting way more weight than what you did last week and just expecting the best. While in a sense that may be slightly true, people often go too far too quick with progressive overload and end up more than likely giving themselves a fucking injury than actually getting any further progress whatsoever. So what I want to say about progressive overload then. Progressive overload is something that you should be chasing every single session. If you look at your logbook for this week compared to last week, you should potentially be aiming to lift more weight with better reps, or with more reps or whatever like that. You should be potentially aiming to do better on a certain lift than what you did the previous week. But there are going to be certain things in line that you need to understand. First of all, you need to make sure that no matter what, you need to maintain a good level of form and technique. You need to make sure that you can properly execute that exercise properly, just as I mentioned in the previous point. If you cannot do that, you're not going to get the benefits of the exercise. It really is as simple as that. So before you look to progress in terms of, including more repetitions, increasing the load slightly, whatever it may be, you need to make sure you have all of those things checked off first before you even think about increasing the load and stuff like that. This is going to swiftly lead me on to the next point about leaving your ego at the door. But I do find that it is ego lifting that actually causes the issue when it comes to progressive overload. But I'll come on to that in a little second. But when it comes to progressive overload, guys, please make sure that you maintain good form, maintain good technique, and you can you can execute the exercise properly. If you can't do that, do not even bother increasing the amount of reps that you're doing or increasing the load, because you are just going to end up fucking yourself up and not making any progress whatsoever. And as I've just said then, that leads me on to point number 5, which is leave your fucking ego at the door. Jesus Christ. This is one I love to rant about, but I'm sure something that I'm definitely guilty of, I'm not going to lie, and I know a lot of people will be at the start of their journeys, and even still now, is ego lifting. We let our ego get in the way. We try to chase numbers in the gym instead of making sure that we're doing things correctly and safely, and that can lead to problems. Unfortunately, I see many guys, when it comes to the process of gaining muscle, they believe that they need to keep chasing more and more weight and more reps and stuff like that to help grow more muscle. And while that is an essential part, while an overload of volume and an increase in volume over time is exactly what you need to grow muscle, unfortunately, people seem to go too far, too quick, and that's where the problems are. Something I mentioned in the previous point, guys, is execution is everything. But the problem with people not executing an exercise properly is because they're too busy trying to fuel their ego, trying to lift more numbers, and trying to basically get sick videos for Instagram. That's all they end up being asked about, and that's where the problems are. Please do me a favor and leave your ego at the door. Every time you walk into the gym, lift with execution in mind, lift with an idea of wanting to make small amounts of progress compared to last week, and make sure you're leaving the gym not only injury-free, but knowing that you've made a good amount of progress and you've created enough stress to force an adaptation. Do not go into the gym and chase numbers. Do not go into the gym and do shit just because it looks good for Instagram and you want fucking 100 likes on every single video and all the comments and all that shit. Please leave your ego at the door. Because if you go into that gym with your ego, you can guarantee that you're not going to execute an exercise properly. You're not going to do your entire workout properly. And you're more than likely going to send yourself into A&E. Really is that simple. Please leave your ego at the door, guys. So guys, final point I'm going to be talking about then is the whole nutritional aspect of building muscle. Again, something that people have very much overcomplicated. And this is something that I'm actually going to talk about, which has even surprised me a little bit, because this is based off some of the stuff that I learned over the weekend when I was with Eric Helms and Mike Zordos at the Shredded by Science conference in London. So what those guys basically taught me then is that when you are in a calorie surplus or when you are in a gaining phase, you don't need to prioritize your macronutrient splits as much. Of course, your calorie intake is still king, and that is what is going to help build muscle, and that's what's going to help change your body composition. But your actual split of macronutrients is not as essential as what has previously been thought, which is a pretty interesting concept. So what I'm going to tell you right now then basically is, when it comes to your protein intake, at least make sure that you're having 1 gram per pound of body weight, which is a little bit contrary to previous belief, but that is what current research is saying is best, because it is saying that a higher carbohydrate intake is actually much preferred in a gaining phase, and that is what seems to be producing better results. So on that note, of course, when it comes to your other splits with carbs and fats and stuff like that, make sure you're going with a predominantly higher carb approach, maintaining at least 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight for recovery reasons and of course for growth too. But that is essentially how you're going to split it. In terms of your calorie surplus size, I would recommend going for a 200 to 300 calorie surplus and targeting around 2 to 3 pounds of weight gain on a monthly basis. You want to go with the monthly targets instead of weekly, purely and simply because on a week-to-week basis you'll find that there will be a lot of things which can actually fluctuate your weight depending on sleep, stress, work, activity levels, all those things. So it's better to go from a monthly perspective of 2 to 3 pounds per month instead of on a weekly basis. But hopefully that is all I need to talk about on the nutrition aspect. It does not need to be complicated. You just need to be in a calorie surplus, maintain a certain amount of protein of 1 gram of protein per pound of body weight, and making sure you adopt a higher carb approach and keeping an eye and making sure that you are in a slight consistent surplus. But that, guys, brings an end to this video. So thank you so much for watching this video. Let me know what you think of it below, and if you have any questions, of course, drop them in the comments. Don't forget to like the video, share it, subscribe to the channel. You know the deal by now. I'll catch you guys in another video very soon. Have a good day.